There are some players in football that divide opinion. Players that are a lightning rod for attention. John Stones is one of those players, and he always has been.
A player rapidly becoming synonymous with English disappointment is Everton's young centre-back John Stones. Despite being just 21 years old, the footballing media has already begun to discredit the defender after months of praise.
This only intensified when he transferred from Everton to Manchester City for £47.5 million in 2016. At the time, it was the second highest fee for a defender. And as the years progressed, he seemed to stagnate.
Listen, if I'm being totally honest, I don't think John Stones has really kicked on since he made that move from Everton to Man City.
But this season has been different. Both the perception and play of Stones has changed.
John Stones is in there, the cross comes in, and City have a chance and they've scored! John Stones!
No, I've got to talk about John Stones because how many times you see players get written off? But, you know, he's gone away and he's worked on his game, he's played with a smile on his face, and he's grown in confidence and he's becoming the player that we all thought he would be. I've still got great...
In his last 6 games, City have kept 5 clean sheets, ascending to 5th in the table. Today we ask, what's changed for John Stones?
John Stones' last few months has been exhilarating, I think, for the fans.
David Mooney is the host of the Blue Moon podcast and the Why Always Us podcast.
He's been on top of the world as a player. I don't think I've seen him in the sort of form he's in now. People have said he's back to his best. I think he's probably been better than his best at City. That's kind of the level he's playing at the moment. And it feels like everything he touches is just going to happen. Everything's going to fall into place perfectly. I don't think I've ever seen a player play with such confidence as Stones is at the moment. That's the level that he's at right now.
Let's go back a few years. You know, for those who haven't been following his journey intently, can you characterize Stones' first 4 seasons at the club before this year?
It's been quite a roller coaster for Stones over his first 4 years. He arrived with lots of hope about what he could achieve at City. There was a lot of excitement about the style of defender he was developing into at Everton, and then obviously at the same time as Guardiola arriving and how Guardiola would kind of mould the team in the image that he wants. And Stones was going to be a big part of that. And for that first season, he came under a lot of pressure because City as a whole, as a defensive unit, weren't working particularly well. They'd obviously made the trade of getting rid of Joe Hart to bring in Claudio Bravo, somebody who was in theory better with the feet than Hart was. And it just didn't really work. Bravo was letting in a lot of goals that shouldn't go in. And then his footwork wasn't exactly the kind of step up we hoped it would be. So that little bit of added pressure alongside Stones playing alongside, Nicholas Otamendi. Vincent Kompany had been injured for most of that season, so he wasn't really there to play a part in the team. And then the kind of the rest of the defence was like a reshaped Alexander Kolarov as a centre back, and it was just all a bit higgledy-piggledy. And for that reason, Stones kind of he was doing as the manager asked. He was trying to play out and play through the defensive thirds, but it was almost like the rest of his team didn't really have a full understanding of what they needed to do. He was still learning what he needed to do as well. And it just resulted in a number of goals going in that were preventable if City had just gone back to basics and lumped it clear when they had the ball at the feet. And so that there became this narrative around City that they can't defend. And then you get into the next season, 17-18, when they won the title with 100 points. They could defend, and they were playing this way. Vincent Kompany and Stones were good at the start of the season, and it was looking like those two would be the partnership all the way through. But that's when Stones' first problem arrived. I remember the incident vividly. He was chasing a ball over the top. I think Vardy was trying to get in behind at Leicester, and Stones gets there first, puts it out for a throw, and his hamstring goes at that point. And from that point, he really, really struggled with both getting back into the team with a consistent run, playing consistently well, and keeping injury-free. And so for the next kind of 2.5 years, every time he came into the team, he he might play one good game and then make a mistake in the next game, and then the pressure would be on him, but then he'd get injured and he'd be out for another 6 weeks or so. And then by the time the run-in came for the end of the season, Guardiola was going, well, I need players that I can trust and the players that I can depend upon. And, for those 2 seasons, for 17, 18, 18, 19, it turned out to be Laporte and company. And then last season comes along, Stones is, company's gone, and there's an opportunity for Stones really to take the bull by the horns. And he has a disastrous game with Nicolas Otamendi at Norwich. And at that point, you're kind of like thinking, well, this could be it for him now. It just isn't working out. And there'd long been thoughts from Guardiola and the coaching staff that the mental side of his game wasn't quite where it needed to be. He'd make a mistake and that would play on his mind for quite some time. Whereas you look at somebody like Laporte, who would make a mistake and they'd kind of dust themselves down and get on with it. So that you get to the point where he makes that mistake in the League Cup final to let Aston Villa back in. City are 2-0 up, the ball's coming over the top, and I think he slips and it ends up allowing Villa in to score.
Stumble by Stones. In by El Ghazi and Samatta has powered Aston Villa back into the contest. A John Stones slip, a quick cross and a super header.
And you're thinking that could be the last action he plays in a City shirt. And so to kind of get from that point in kind of, February, March 2019 to... or 2020 even, to where he is now, just less than 12 months on. It's a phenomenal turnaround. And I think there's the character that he is off the pitch and what he means to the team and kind of as a person. I don't think there's a City fan that's not really pleased for him,
So just to kind of sum up what you're saying, it sounds like there were a lot of injuries, and then kind of on the mental side as well, it seems like he didn't really have the mental maturity to handle kind of making mistakes and the pressure at the time.
Yeah, I don't know if it's mental maturity, but it was certainly a level of kind of overthinking his mistakes and not being able to kind of move on from his mistakes. And I think that I think that's one of the biggest improvements in that in the last few weeks. Well, first off, he hasn't made many mistakes, if any. I can't recall any off the top of my head. But you kind of get the impression that at the minute he's quite happy to dust himself down and go, well, we'll go again. We know what's going to happen if we play how we should be playing. And I think that could be one of the biggest reasons to his improvement, if he's been able to sort out the mental side of the game.
Now, in December, Guardiola was quoted as saying, quote, "But footballers are not just footballers. They are human beings. Human beings have problems and personal lives. Some footballers, when they have a problem outside, they forget it when they are inside. And other ones put the problems inside." What personal issues do you think Guardiola might have been referring to that Stones might have had?
Well, he split up with his long-term partner, and by the kind of media reports around it, it wasn't an easy thing. I mean, it's never an easy thing to go through for anybody, but it was a particularly difficult split. And there was an incident where City went to Spurs early in 2020, and I think he had a hearing the next day or in the coming days about custody of his child. And Guardiola just said quite bluntly that, I pretty much told him he wasn't in the right frame of mind to be playing the game at Spurs, and that's where Eric Garcia was on the bench. And there was kind of a lot of talk about what was going on for that game, because Stones was fit, he was available, but he was just left in Manchester. And that... I think Guardiola's right. You can't ignore the effect of something like, a long-term relationship breakup, custody of your children, what that sort of effect on players' lives. They are human beings, as Guardiola says. And I think, hopefully those sorts of issues that he was having to deal with, hopefully he's dealt with them and he's in a much better place now for it. And hopefully that's one of the reasons why he's been able to just turn his form around in the last few months.
Now, that brings us to this season. Going into the season, what did Manchester City fans kind of expect out of Stones? I know there were rumors this summer that he might be on the way out.
Yeah, I actually think he would have been on the way out had Eric Garcia not made a big song and dance about wanting to go back to Barcelona. I think if Guardiola had the option of keeping Garcia in the summer and there being no question about whether he wanted to stay or leave, I think it'd probably be Stones that would be on the shop window right now. And I think it's partly because of City's transfer strategy, in that, it was clear last season they needed to bring in, 1-2 centre-backs. They brought in Ake pretty quickly before last season ended, actually. And then, Diaz was a little bit later, but obviously was one that they've been working on all through the summer when they were looking at Koulibaly and Koundé as well. And so you'd assume that those two would go ahead of Stones in the pecking order, and Laporte would be your main man. You'd have one of the other two next to him, and then Stones would be your fourth choice. And as soon as Eric Garcia made it clear that... Garcia would be your fourth choice, and then as soon as Garcia made it clear that he wanted to leave, it would then swap round to be Stones, because I think the hierarchy kind of realised we can't go out and buy 3 centre-backs in a window. It's not a good look if we go out and do that. So he kind of found himself in this position where I guess there were offers on the table. There was rumours about Newcastle. There was rumours about going back to Everton, about whether those two clubs were interested. And, from what we were hearing, he was the one that turned down a move and was the one that said, well, no, I want to stay and fight for my place here. He then gets lucky in a sense that he's available to start the opening day of the weekend, and Aymeric Laporte had tested positive for COVID, so he wasn't available for the game. I think Nathan Ake was injured at that stage as well, so it kind of had to be John Stones come in, and he did really well, but then he got injured, and it just kind of felt like exactly the same old story was going on again. He comes in, does well, gets injured, and it's game over for him again. You kind of look at the position he's in now. It's absolutely balmy to consider that he's keeping Laporte out of the team, because, less than 6 months ago, City would fall apart if they didn't have Laporte in the defence. Now he can't get into the team, and it's just bonkers.
So how did he come back into the fold back in the end of November?
He was playing in the Champions League. City had qualified from the group, and I think at that point Guardiola said, right, well, now is the chance for you guys to stake a claim for a position in the team. And he came in, and City started keeping clean sheets, and he developed an understanding with Ruben Dias that I've not seen in City centre-backs for a long, long time.
These two have created a formidable partnership. They seem to be reading everything, getting back into position, organising. Roy mentioned during the game.
And the big moment came when he kind of played himself into this undroppable form, and Laporte was available for the Manchester derby, and Guardiola had a decision to make, because he'd spent all the last kind of few weeks almost sending a message out to Laporte after his mistake at Spurs that had let, I think it was Son in for the opening goal.
Here's Son. Every time he touches the ball against Manchester City, Son seems to score. He's done it again inside the first 5 minutes.
Well, what a start. We know that City line. They push up. Laporte pushes in. I don't like Ederson's position at all.
Guardiola had basically been saying, look, I'm picking players based on their form. I'm not picking players based on their reputation or who I think is the better player. If you're playing well, you're in the team. And so that's a message to Stones to say, look, you're playing well, you're gonna keep your place. But it's also a message to Laporte to say, look, you need to book your ideas up a bit here, because you've made a mistake that's cost us a goal in a game that we've ended up losing. And this guy's playing well. So you need to, when you get your chance, you need to play well to match him and get your place back. And so the inverse kind of happened to Stones. And then the Manchester derby comes along, and Guardiola has a choice. He either goes back on his word and drops Stones and puts Laporte in, or he sticks to his word and picks Stones and shows it really is about how well he's playing right now. He does the latter, and that as a confidence boost must be huge. And given the number of clean sheets that him and Dias have been a part of this season, City have got the best defence in the Premier League. You can't say that it's been a bad call from Guardiola to kind of leave Laporte out and freeze him out for the time being. So the confidence boost he'll get from just having that backing of his manager has been huge. And the turning point was probably those European games, the point where he was coming into the team and City started keeping clean sheets and started playing a bit more from the back like they used to.
Do you see Laporte jumping him, back into the lineup, or is this kind of John Stones' role to lose?
It's his role to lose. There'll come a point where Laporte gets back into the team. There kind of has to be, because this season is unlike any other in that sense. I think looking at the maths, if City were to get to, it might be unlikely, but if City were to get to finals in all the competitions they're in, there is literally not enough time in the calendar to play all the games in. So that there's going to come a point where they're probably having to play 2 games a week if it gets to that stage. And there's no way Guardiola can keep a settled back line in that sense. You couldn't ask Stones and Diaz to play 90 minutes on Saturday, Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday, whatever it work out to be. So there'll be an element of rotation in that. But at the moment, while games are twice a week and City are playing weekend, midweek, it's Stones' to lose because he has been playing that well and his partnership with Diaz has been that good. They've been covering each other. They kind of have developed this understanding between each other. And I think to break that up right now would actually be quite detrimental to the team. It's not great for Laporte because he's sitting on the bench at the moment, going, well, I'm fit, I'm available, and I want to play. But it's kind of what happens at a top level club. If you end up in a position where you're out of the team, you've got to take your chance when it comes along, but you might not get that chance for a couple of months.
You said earlier that he's at his peak. He's never looked better in his Manchester City career. What about his game is making you say that or think that? What is he doing differently right now that he didn't do before?
He's playing a lot taller. And what I mean by that, he looks like he believes in himself. I'll go back to that League Cup final where he made the mistake in the first half. He had a fantastic second half. Aston Villa were pumping balls into the box towards the end. And I think Stones got his head on about 3 or 4 really good crosses that could have caused a lot of problems, especially with Bravo in goal. And he's kind of brought that into the last few weeks. He's reading the game really well. So, you take the United game in the League Cup recently. There was a number of balls over the top where normally a defender would get onto it and just pop it out of play. But he's playing with such confidence at the moment. He felt confident enough to take a touch, look at his goalkeeper, consider the back pass, and a couple of times go for the back pass, and then kind of have it back under pressure and play out from there. Or he'd get there and turn the other way, go around the other side of the striker, and suddenly he's got space ahead of him to find Fernandinho in the midfield. And so it's this level of confidence that when he's under pressure, he knows what to do and he backs his own ability to do it. And I just wonder if he's kind of relaxed into the role a bit more now, and he's just trusting his own instincts rather than kind of playing through his mind what he has to do in each situation. He's just kind of going with it and just relaxing into it and doing what he should do. Put that alongside how well Ruben Diaz has been playing, and you saw in that Manchester derby again the number of blocks that Diaz made. He's been incredible, kind of last-ditch defending. He's covered Stones. So when Stones has stepped out to put pressure on the ball, if it's played past him, Diaz has been there to sweep up behind. And it's been the same the other way around. When Diaz has stepped out, Stones has been aware enough to kind of sweep up behind. So he's developed this understanding with Diaz. He's playing with confidence. And I think let's not forget that in there's always been a really good defender anyway. So you kind of mix all that together, and that's where he's at the moment. Everything has just kind of fallen into place for him to recapture the form that he had, 2-3 years ago.
If we take a step back and zoom out, City have the league's best defense, at least statistically, having given up only 13 goals. How much of that is down to their center backs, and how much of that is driven by people elsewhere on the pitch?
It is a mixture of both. Obviously, the way City defend is more of a team effort than people might think. A lot of it comes from pressure on the ball from the front players, and that was missing a little bit at the start of the season. It's weird to say that City have the best defence because they obviously they shipped 5 goals against Leicester. I mean, 3 were penalties, but they still shipped 5 against Leicester. And it's almost been from that point on, Guardiola said, look, we can't carry on like this. We need to find a way to be a bit more secure. And for a few months, kind of through October, November time, City were really, really boring to watch. There was not a lot of entertainment on the pitch. And he kind of invented this double pivot last season with Rodri and Gundogan holding midfield. Fans wanted to see that broken up and see a little bit more excitement at the front end by moving Gundogan a bit forward, maybe. And Guardiola was just steadfast against doing it. He was consistently picking them to kind of protect the defence. And he did that throughout November and October, November, a little bit in December. And it was, like I say, quite dull. Then suddenly, once the clean sheets have started racking up and the defenders are starting to play with a little bit of confidence, he's kind of loosened the shackles a little bit and tweaked the front end formation. And suddenly City are looking like they're able to defend as well as they had been previously, and also have a little bit more movement and creativity up front. And that's kind of what's driving this at the moment. You look at the biggest driving force behind the clean sheet run, though, And it has to come back to how well Stones and Diaz have performed together. I mean, I've not got the stats off the top of my head, but they've been in a ridiculous run of clean sheets. I think it's something like two games where they've conceded a goal as that partnership in 7, 8, 9?
It's 7, 7 games, yeah.
So it really is quite a magnificent run, and a lot of it is down to just how well those two have been communicating, how well those two have been putting pressure on the opposition, and they've played some decent teams in there. It's not been a case of they've been playing the league's cannon fodder every week. They've played some decent teams to have that run. So I think those two need to take the bulk of the credit. A little bit does come from how the rest of the team is set up, and Guardiola does a lot to kind of protect against counter-attacks. But I think the vast majority of the credit has to go to both Stones and Diaz.
And De Bruyne again. Sterling's in the middle. And Foden! Manchester City in electrifying form all of a sudden.
They had a huge win the other week against Chelsea, big 3-1 win, and they kind of look like their old self. What did they discover in that Chelsea game that they can replicate going forward?
This is weird because Guardiola changed the attack. As I was just saying there about how the team was set up, we saw the starting lineup. We saw obviously no recognised striker and Raheem Sterling on the pitch, and normally that means Sterling is playing as the central player. We saw Gundogan and Rodri both in the team, and that usually means that they're going to be a double pivot holding in front. And what happened was Gundogan was further forward in a number 8 position alongside Bernardo Silva in a number 8 position. Phil Foden was wide left, Sterling was wide right, and it was De Bruyne that was playing through the middle. And the three of them just kept moving around, and nobody kind of held their position. And that's something we've not seen from City for a long time. Guardiola's kind of stuck steadfast to this inverted wingers style where he has, usually Riyad Mahrez on the right, usually Raheem Sterling on the left, both of them trying to cut in to get onto the stronger foot and force a shot. And Gundogan and Rodri holding in the middle. And what that's kind of done is it's stunted City's attack a little bit because it's quite easy to defend against. They're making the pitch really narrow. Teams can pack in players and there's just no space to work with. As soon as City have stretched the pitch and started having players rotating positions, the other team couldn't handle it. And I think Chelsea just weren't expecting that sort of movement from this City team, given how they've been playing in the weeks before. I think one of the biggest things for that is getting Raheem Sterling out on the right-hand side, getting a left-footer in Phil Foden out on the left, and just making sure that those two players are hugging the touchline for long spells in that game, meaning that any back 4 or back 5 can't sit in the width of the penalty area because they have to think about the players that are stretching the game. And that then allowed room for Gundogan and Bernardo and De Bruyne at times to kind of sneak into the box without there being 7, 8, 9 defenders to get through to get a chance on goal.
In their upcoming games, they play Brighton, Palace, Villa, West Brom, Sheffield United, and Burnley before their big game at Liverpool. Do you expect them to be leading the league heading into that game?
Yeah, you can't take the games lightly, but equally, on paper, they're the games that Guardiola would be saying, look, we have to win these games. These are the bread and butter games. If you're going to put a title challenge together, you have to beat these teams. And it's a really weird position to be in because when Liverpool dropped points a few weeks ago, it suddenly became the title was back in City's hands. And quietly, City had a really bad start to the season, and almost I think a lot of fans had written off how badly they'd started and said, well, that's it. They're not going to be involved in any of the title picture. They have the game postponed against Everton. It gives them 2 games in hand on Liverpool, which could cause a bit of fixture congestion a bit later on. So the fact that they could end up in a position where they beat these teams and they end up top of the table and with games in hand, I think you'd be rubbing your eyes at that thought a couple of months ago when City got battered by Leicester and struggled against Leeds and West Ham. You'd go, well, there's no chance they're going to be top of the table with games in hand. That's just absurd. But now it's looking quite tasty, and it's looking like it really is opening up for City to take control of this title race right now.
David Mooney is the host of the Blue Moon podcast and the Why Always Us podcast. He also contributes to BBC Radio 5 Live. The music for this episode was provided under the Creative Commons license by Blue Dot Sessions, and you can find more information about those songs in the episode show notes. This episode was produced by myself and John McKenzie. I'm Josh Schneider-Weiler. Thanks for listening to Football Today.